You are unique. There is only one of you.
Have you ever felt like you just didn't fit in? Like no matter how hard you try, you're always falling short and wondering if there's something wrong with you, especially after finding out you have ADHD. Maybe today we can offer a different perspective. What if the issue isn't you, but that the systems around you just don't work for how you operate?
The kids now that used to be my friends and that went on to college and university, I was not part of the circle anymore. I was a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down on.
Welcome back to Connection Over Perfection, where we journey through life's challenges together, seeking understanding, growth, and most importantly, connection. I'm your host, Amber McCrea, and today we're tackling a topic that resonates deeply with many of us, navigating the complexities of ADHD and trauma. Today, we have a remarkable guest joining us, John A. Brink, born in 1940 in Nazi-occupied Holland during the Second World War. John's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. From foraging for food in harsh wartime conditions to immigrating to Canada with just $25.47 in his pocket, John embodies resilience, determination, and unwavering strength. He is an author, founder of Brink Forest Products, and the host of his own podcast, On the Brink, and a fierce advocate for erasing the stigma surrounding ADHD. John's accomplishments are truly inspiring. 83 young, he continues to lead as president and CEO of over a dozen companies, all while dedicating himself to supporting charities and causes he truly believes in. He writes, he's public speaking, and he loves spending time with his family, wife, and animals. Today, John joins us not just as an expert, but as a friend offering a helping hand. John, welcome to the show.
Amber, my pleasure.
Thank you. So, John, as someone who has experienced the challenges of ADHD firsthand and has overcome them and achieved success, how do you help guide individuals who feel overwhelmed by their emotions, particularly after receiving that ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah, very interesting question, Amber. For me, during the war years in Europe, in Holland, actually northeastern Holland, was a tough time. And I remember parts of the war from the time I was 3 to 4 years old, bombers overhead, especially the winter of 1944-45, what you call that the hunger winter. Things were very, very difficult where I lived. My mother was on her own, had 3 kids. Every morning we would go with gunny sacks into the railroad yards, look for anything edible and burnable. I still can, even today, still feel the feeling of hunger and cold. It was the coldest winter on record at the same time. Academically, I was not very successful. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. Kind of felt a bit like I had failed. I had the dream that I had developed already for quite a while that we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And I always knew I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And so, especially after not being academically very successful, I kind of felt I had to start anew again because I knew inside of me that I was just as good as all the other younger people that went to school with me and ended up in the college and then university, where I became more a laborer and worked in a furniture factory and became a furniture maker. I'm proud of that today, but then it was a bit of a challenge. I developed that dream. I was going to go when I was 17, was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years, and then finally went to the land of my dreams, Canada, when I was 23. I took a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I had $150 Canadian with me when I left Amsterdam. Schiphol of Canada is British Columbia, lots of timber. I was going to build a lumber mill. That was my dream. My second dream. The first one was going to Canada. The second was to build a lumber mill to prove to myself that I was just as smart as all the other kids that were much more successful academically than I was. Very quickly, the other part that I had is, as you already indicated, is that when I came to Vancouver, I couldn't speak language, didn't have a job, didn't know a soul. Went to the immigration office. Fortunately, there was a German fellow. I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, go to Prince George. That is in the center of British Columbia. And most people know British Columbia. They know likely Vancouver. It's about 500 miles north of Vancouver. Prince George is in the center of British Columbia. When I came off the bus in Prince George, I had my suitcase, my 3 books, my 2 sets of clothes, and I had in my pocket $25.47. I counted it at least 3 times, but what I had plenty of is attitude. I'm always positive, passion. Whatever I do, I give it 150%, work ethic. And I work harder than anybody. And I did that then. I still do that today at 83. Now we come to the question, likely, is even when I started here, or very, very quickly as a cleanup man, very quickly I became a supervisor. And then fairly quickly, within 10 years, I had already companies, and I started my own company, Brink Force Products, 50 years ago in 1975. But even then, people said to me, "Oh, you're so successful." And I didn't feel that way. I still felt that I had failed in some way. But then one day, what happened, I went into a bookstore, and I still remember when it was, January 1997. And I picked up a book, and I still don't know why. The book's title was Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell. I don't know why I picked up the book, and I looked at the book, and it was about ADHD. And I said, "Oh my God, that's me." And so I wrote in the book in Dutch because I was ashamed of it, because it kind of implied a mental disorder of some description. And I wrote in the book in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. What I started doing is then from there and then researching on Google as to what is ADD or ADHD, what is it all about? And the more I found out about it, is that it is fairly common initially. And I thought probably from what I read in Google, probably 8% of the population have the benefit, I call it, or the, ADHD. The more I found out about it for myself, the more I became convinced that the frequency of occurrence is probably more than 20%. Then I had the opportunity many years later now. I also am a podcaster. I do On the Brink podcasting. My podcast number 203 was with Dr. Halliwell that wrote the book, Driven to Distraction.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, in 1993. I bought it in 1997. I still have that book today. And my interview with Dr. Halliwell is on YouTube and all the other ones where On the Brink is.
That link is in the episode description.
So my discussion with him were that in my experience, in all those years that I knew I was ADHD, it became more public about it. But the other part about it is that I believed, I mentioned to Dr. Halliwell, that the frequency of occurrence is probably 20% or more. He said, "No, John, it's more than 25%. Now, the other thing that I found out about it is that it's all the interaction I had with CEOs and entrepreneurs that I believe at least, I said to Dr. Halliwell, 50% of the entrepreneurs and successful, and the operative is successful, CEOs are ADHD. And he said, "No, John, more than 75%. And I agree with him. So my experience, coming back to your question, although I was affected by trauma during the war years, I don't believe the two are necessarily related. When I left the war, I'm still affected by ADHD, obviously, but also PTSD in terms of from the war years and the inner child. It was not until I was 57 years old that I picked up the book of Dr. Halliwell and said, "Oh my God, that's me." And then it took me then even, Amber, 5 years before I would go to my doc. There was also a personal friend of ours. And I walked into his office. He said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we did the analysis, and he did the analysis. And so he then confirmed, yes, I'm ADHD. Up to that point, now I was 62. It explained a lot of things to me that cleared up the past, but also put a whole different perspective on the current situation and the time that I left Holland in particular, or my lack of success and my academic success, is that I believe now, and I did ever since I found out about Dr. Helliwell, that ADHD is a superpower.
I just wrote that.
The superpower. And so I became more public about it. I speak a lot about it. I include a lot. And even to the extent that I wrote a book about it. And the book is this one, ADHD Unlocked.
Right. Yeah. And that's going to be linked to, and I listened to some of your talks on that. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to ask this question, because I know so many of our listeners resonate with that. And I know that they've been in that spot, like you said, that feeling of failure, feeling like something is wrong with me.
Exactly.
That feeling of that you failed, and why can't I get this? Why is everybody else getting it and I can't seem to get it? And that feeling of wanting to prove, hey, I am just as good. I am just as smart. And coming along this book and saying, helping you make sense of it. Would you say, as my friend put it, your imperfection is your perfection?
Yeah, I believe there is no question in my mind that once you understand it, then it is a benefit. And if you followed me along a little bit, I do a lot of presenting, not only podcasting, as you well know, but I do also keynote presentations. Didn't start that way, but only since I found out I'm ADHD, it gave me the confidence to unlock some of the other qualities that I have. One of them is writing books, obviously, but also I'm a very good presenter, in-demand keynote speaker. Is by the time I'm done with my presentations, a lot of people in the room say, darn, I wish I had it too. Because it is that ability that once you understand it and make it work for you, is that, as you already said, it's not about hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is. That's not what this is about. But I do a lot of stuff. I still get up at 5:30 in the morning. I love my day, whatever I do. And with all the challenges along the way, I write books, I'm podcasting, I'm a speaker. People say to me, how do you do all this stuff? I say, ADHD. That's how I do it. So it has become that. But so often, Amber, I interact with people that relate to me. They have never really recognized, although it virtually happens on a daily basis. Even people that are older, even in one case in particular, somebody in their 80s said to me, I'm ADHD. I've never really recognized it, but I am. I've had people, a good example was I gave a lot of my books away to people in the region. And at one point I did a presentation, keynote presentation. The night before I was staying in the hotel and I was having dinner by myself. And a fella came up to me and he said, hey, John, I don't want to disturb your dinner, but could I talk to you after you're done? And I said, well, sure. Where are you? He said, I'm sitting down there. Okay, so good. So I went over to him. And then he said to me, I got your book, ADHD. I have a 15-year-old son that has been really challenged by this, been troubled by it all. So when I got your book, we read it together.
Yo, this is Hunter from the Everything's Connected podcast. You clearly have great taste in podcasts because you're listening to this awesome show. Did you know I am also part of the Podcast Connection Network? That's right. There's a whole network of shows dedicated to mental health and holistic well-being, just like this one. We've got something for every mood and every goal. So if you're looking to expand your horizons and explore some incredible content, check us out. The link to the Podcast Connection Network is waiting for you in the description below.
Okay, now back to the show.
Can you imagine?
That gave me chills.
Yeah. And I hear that all the time, Amber, all those kind of things. So what I'm suggesting to our friends that are watching, but not only them that believe or may have ADHD, this book is also for people that are slow learners because of trauma or other things that have affected their lives. And subsequently, the academic system that we know it is not always suitable for those people either. The other part that I said, and I already made those comments, the frequency of occurrence is much more frequent than most people even imagined it before. What I'm saying is that not only with my book, but also Dr. Helliwell, that's written 18 books, 5 about distractions, is that it is virtually unavoidable that we, you, me, everybody else will encounter ADHD in some form in our circle, either in our family, along our friends, or a workplace, but we will interact with people that are, in my mind, benefiting from. It's not a liability, but they tend to be a little different. And that's a positive, not a negative. And to read the book, you will understand them better. They have this uniqueness of becoming very good at areas of their interest. And in my case, I started blooming after my 60s. That's when I became a keynote speaker in demand. I started writing books. I'm working on the last book that I'm writing right now is one that you may find interesting. It's called Living Young, Dying Old. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. I'm in training now for competing in the Arnolds in 1985, and I'm 85.
Congratulations. That is amazing. You said so many amazing things. I want to just go back. You talked about our school system and the way that it's programmed for us to learn. And I think that that's where so much of this stems from, is saying, hey, we all learn the same way, and we don't. We're all individuals. Recognizing that we learn differently and honoring that. I learned this as a coach helping women. Like, why do some women get it? Some women, it takes them longer. Some of it goes back to how our brain is wired for instant gratification, long-term gratification, and in different areas of our life. So some people, like you, it looks like, in bodybuilding, you can have long-term gratification. You can make goals very far down. But in some areas, you might have that short-term gratification, have to make short-term goals. And so understanding what areas, how your brain works, and make it work for you instead of trying to fit into the box, and taking not what's wrong with me, it's what's wrong with the system. How do we change this? How can we learn in a way that resonates and gets us where we want to go?
I agree with you 100%, Amber. Is what I did in telling you a little bit. I also wrote a book, Against All Odds. It's about not how successful John is, through all the ups and downs, So I have to tell you a little bit is that I was sitting in a flight from Vancouver to Victoria, and I was sitting in the flight, and the fellow sat next to me, and he said, hey, John, do you remember me? I said, kind of, in a way. He said, I was sitting next to you, and he said, my name is Tom, and Tom Romer. I said, okay. And he said, you were writing a book Against All Odds. I said, yeah, I'm done with that book. He said, how did it go? Blah, 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 blah. I said, I'm writing another book. Dr. Romer, he is the VP Education at BC Institute of Technology. So which was interesting. So I told him about the ADHD Unlocked that I'm doing and what it was all about. And he said, that is interesting. We are looking at that in terms of how can we change our teaching system in such a way that it attracts those people that have challenges with it. He said, so we are looking at something that is called micro-certification. And I said, that's interesting. Now, then the problem happened. The plane stopped, and he went out and I went out. And the more I thought about it, again, the following, by pure coincidence, he was sitting in 1F on the front, and I was in the 5th row, and the plane was full. I kind of called him. I said, Tom, wait at the gate for me. And all the people were looking and said, what is going on? So, and then I talked to him again. I said, Tom, after we talked about micro-certification, what is it about? He said, what it is about, some people, and obviously which we already recognize, cannot sit in a classroom for 6 years or 4 years or whatever it is, and for 3 years and spend a whole lot of time doing stuff that are of no benefit to them other than is complementary. Is so focus on the key areas of the skill set that you're trying to transfer. They call that micro-certification. I said, bingo, because the problem that I had with the book is that, okay, John, I like the book. That's all good. But there is, in my mind, still something missing. I describe what I do and all the other kind of things about it, interviews in there, that's all good. But where do we go from here? The same question you asked. And I say, redo the educational system, become more sensitive to the skill sets that we are trying to transfer, and then add the other things. I'm not saying that they should not, but add those later. So you then maintain the interest of the challenges of the persons that are very good at things they are interested in, but not so good at things that they are not so interested in. It would be a whole new approach. And again, he wrote a little piece in my book about it, actually. And wherever the opportunity presents itself, I indicate micro-certification as becoming part of the learning system.
I love that. That's what I use as baby steps. I have found that 80% of people need that instant gratification, that consistency in order to create that new pattern, in order to want to do it. We have to make it fun and we have to make it repeatable and we have to celebrate the small wins. We are human. We need those dopamine hits. We have to have the snowball effect to keep us going. And that's okay. It is okay. It's been looked at as bad and wrong for so long. I don't know if you've experienced this, but if you aren't this other way, you're lazy, you're not as worthy, even in our work society, right? The jobs, what they do is they focus on 20% of the people that do 80% of the work, instead of figuring out how to structure companies to make the 80% how we reach them.
Let me give you an example, Amber, is that with the companies that I have, we advertised for a senior management role across Canada. And the advertisement that we had, other than laying out the skill sets that we require, we put in there ADHD considered to be an asset.
I love that paradigm shift.
The reason that I'm saying this is because, with all due respect to people that educated in universities and all the other kind of places for skill sets and make them management, is that the advantage that I've had in my self-taught approach to it is that I understand managing in a box system, that if this happens, you do this, that, and the other thing. But what I naturally do is that I always look outside the box. What else can we do? How can this? Why are we doing this? And why are we doing the other thing? The other thing that I have an advantage is I think forward. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That has helped me from the time that I was young, even when I was not in management, but it gave me the ability to look at my business plan for the Brink group of companies that I wrote in early 1975. I had no idea about ADHD or any of the other kind of things. Even today, my employees say, how is it possible? Because we're still following that particular business plan. It has given me those particular skill sets. And then the other part that you may find interesting because of lack of self-confidence to a certain extent is that I was not very good right up to 1990. I was successful. And you say, yeah, you're so successful and all the other. I didn't feel that way. I still felt even then I had failed. If I had to interact with people more than 2 or 3 inside the company was okay, but as soon as it was outside of the company, I was not very good at it. Ex-sister-in-law actually dragged me to an organization called Toastmasters. And I said, what are they doing there? And she said, do I have to say something? She said, no, you just sit and you watch. And say, okay. So in the middle of that meeting, somebody stood up and said, hey, John, tell us all about you. I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. So now for our guests that are not familiar with Toastmasters, it's an organization that specializes in communication skills, not only speaking, but be good listeners and a number of other things, that's thinking on your feet, all those kind of things. Probably 450,000 people today as we talk are involved in Toastmasters in different clubs, probably up to, I would say, 10 million people over the last 30, 40 years have already benefited to being involved to a certain extent. In my case, I stayed with Toastmasters for 10 years. I reached the highest level, which is a distinguished Toastmaster. And it's probably less than 0.5% that will go to that level. I'm not saying they couldn't go higher, but they take as much as they need. In my case, I went all the way, stayed in there for 10 years, and it changed my life, So the things that changed my life is my dream of going to Canada. The second one is probably not being overly successful. You may find this interesting, is that, tongue in cheek a little bit, is that People said to me during a presentation that I did is that I failed grade 7 3 times, and saying, did you feel very bad about that? I said, yeah, it really bothered me for years and years and years. They said, really? Yeah. They said, I should have quit earlier. So so because it didn't work for me, the system. If I would have forced myself through it, my handwork and my skill sets that I developed working in a factory, going that particular route was much more helpful to me and helped me much more in my future years. And then especially when I developed in the 90s the ability to become an effective communicator. That means a good listener, a good speaker, thinking on your feet. Obviously, podcasting comes to mind.
Right.
But also becoming a writer, because people already told me for years, they say, John, you got such an interesting life. Why you should write a book. And I started, writing books is not easy, as you likely know. And I stopped, and on and on and on. And then I knew if I didn't do it now, about 5-6 years ago, then it will never happen. So the book, Against All Odds, is 80 years of living, 20 years of thinking about writing a book about it, and it took me 2 years to write it. It is all about the ups and downs along the way, mainly about falling down, standing up, never give up, attitude, passion, work ethic, all those in combination. Very successful, actually.
That's huge what you just said. The people who are just at the beginning with that ADHD and they're still in that phase of, I'm not enough, I'm a failure, this isn't working. Something you said is willing to fail. And you said you felt disconnected from yourself, even though you were successful. A huge thing about going anywhere is getting curious. Seeing that, okay, maybe something is not working for me. This isn't working. I'm not getting where I want to go. And instead of using that as a failure, as a bad thing, you've used it as, okay, this isn't working. I failed. Why? Let me get curious. Let me try other things and see what I can get to make work for me, instead of this isn't working and I can't do it. And I think that that's the mentality, the framework, paradigm shift. When you saw that book and you felt seen and you made sense of what was happening. There's a lot of controversy on whether ADHD is a trauma response or whatever the belief is it's there and it's part of you, and you can either recognize it and use it as a tool to bring you further or to keep you stuck.
No question about it, Amber. And take inspiration from others that have been successful in it. That's why, to me, it is very important to talk about it and to be very open and frank about it. And I do that in all kinds of settings. I could not have been successful unless I had discovered it, already in Toastmasters, that I had the ability to communicate if I felt secure in the setting. That was already a big step forward for me. The next one is starting to write and understanding that I have skill sets that are unique to me. And the other part that I speak, and especially to young people about it, is that comes to the point that you made, is that whoever they are, young people in particular these days, is I say to them, you are unique. There is only one of you, and you can do whatever you want. And that's the biggest advantage, I believe, is saying that you are special. And so you have to come to peace with who you are. And once you do, then you have to look at saying, okay, this is what I can do. And then from there and then get inspiration from others that have been successful.
Wow, John, that was really big. And I could tell even that still was so emotional for you. What happened for you right there? Did it bring you back to remembering that feeling of not being special, not being unique? Can you talk to us about that?
Kids are hard on each other, right? So that, after you fail, and then I failed grade 7 3 times, so people said to my parents, maybe send them to a mentally challenged school, so they were not going to do that. Dad managed a small lumber company, and my grandfather was a master carpenter. How about making him a furniture maker? How would that be? And saying, okay, well, let's send him to a factory where they do furniture. So that's where I started when I was 13. But it was an amazing experience. But the kids now that used to be my friends and that went on to college and university, I was not part of the circle anymore. I was a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down on. I was always an optimist. I've always had that attitude, passion, work ethic, avoid the negative. I had to figure out what about me was different. And as that kind of unlocked, finding people that were speakers in different settings, I would go out of my way already when I was young to find those speakers and they talking about what made them successful. But it took me a long, long time, well after I was 60, that I knew I have the same ability as the others. And the reason that things happen like they did, I'm ADHD and I'm proud of that. But even more importantly is that I see so many young people in particular now that feel they either not good enough, they don't look good enough, this is not good enough, and say, remember, you are special.
That's so huge. And I know so many of the listeners do struggle with not feeling enough, being young, especially. I mean, even now, the judgment, the comparison, our biggest fear is being alone, being abandoned. And so when you are separated, segregated, and saying you are not enough by, doctors, parents, other people, your peers, that's really tough to be alone in that. I think what we're saying here today, John, what I'm hearing is that you aren't alone. We've all been there. We've experienced it. We see that pain and we see you. You are enough and you are special. You do have something to offer and you are valuable. You do matter.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to seek counseling.
Mm-hmm.
The fear for me during the war years, my dad was drafted into the Dutch army in April of 1945. They didn't know if he was dead or alive for 5 years. Got in the bombing of Rotterdam. My mom was alone for 5 years with 3 young kids. I had the PTSD as a result of seeing far too much that I shouldn't have seen, but also dealing with the inner child. And it was not until I was in my 50s that I got counseling for that. Very emotional, but very, very important. So what I'm saying is that reconcile for the young people that you are special, you're unique. And then the second one is that everything is possible. And then listen to other people that have been there. Read the information, wherever the opportunity presents itself.
John, thank you. And I think one of the biggest things that really has resonated and connected for me is that you are extremely successful. You have all of these things, but you're able to tap back into that pain where you came from. And I think that authenticity and vulnerability is what speaks volumes and draws people in. I know the listeners will definitely get something out of this and head over to read all of your books. I know that I definitely will be diving into some of them because I think it's so important in a world saturated with professionals. We miss sometimes that authenticity of somebody being there, knowing that pain that we feel and feeling alone. Just what you've expressed on this podcast is that I have been there and I remember and I understand where you are.
And I have an obligation to communicate about it.
That's your passion,
Yes.
Your mission.
Yes.
John, thank you so much. And everything is going to be linked in the description episode, but can you just tell us where everybody can find you?
JohnABrink.com.
And again, just the authenticity and the vulnerability that I can connect with. I think that that's so important. The world needs more John Brinks. We are thankful for you. John, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to connecting again soon.
Sounds good to Amber. Appreciate it. Take care.
The views and opinions expressed by myself and any guest on this podcast are solely ours and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any organizations we are affiliated with. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. As always, consult with a trusted healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or concerns.